Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corin, so we have done a few episodes about the not too scintillating topic of labeling, and I have to admit that even by my standards of what obscure topics that I'm able to really sit through your always erudite episodes through, the one that I've actually struggled on is learning about label makers. It's niche, but we've talked about stuff like inventory and its importance in the context of ballistic missile stocks. And I mentioned that my overarching goal, or why I've become into this stuff, why I've set up my own home inventory system, is due to a few very disruptive moves due to the, I would say, unregulated craziness of the rental market in Israel, which we're still very much in the midst of because we have to plan our next move. I've learned over time that there's a few things you can do to make your life so much easier. One is decluttering, get rid of what you don't need. And number two is know what you have. And that's when I mentioned Homebox. It's been an absolute gem of a discovery. It's a self-hosted inventory system. And I began with QR codes. You just print them and you stick them on. Fairly easy. But then pretty quickly discovered that there's some things where, well, it's just not really possible to get a label onto, but they might be quite valuable. The stuff I'm getting into at the moment with building computers, upgrading computers, and trying to build out actually my own workbench, the problem actually gets worse rather than better. You learn as you get into building and tinkering with computers that there's just so many little things, and every build requires something ultra specific. I'm talking about standoffs, M3 screws, M2 screws, quarter inch to 3/4 adapters. The more I do this stuff, the more I feel a bit less crazy at having put so much effort over the years into actually taking stock of what I have. And it's thankless and it's tedious, but when you're actually building stuff, I think the reason that I got into this, there's nothing worse than getting all the way through. Happened to me just a few days ago. Was trying to put in a new GPU, and then you realize that you need a very specific and proprietary Seasonic cable that you don't have. You have everything except this, and now it's going to take 3 weeks to come through AliExpress. So another benefit of the inventory stuff is, and especially AI comes into this, and a fantastic use for it in my opinion, you can actually say, hey AI tool, here's what I have. Anything I'm missing, or hey AI tool, here's my inventory, any stuff that's deprecated, or I might be able to donate or give away to friends who might actually want it. Have a look. And I found those uses incredibly powerful. But the final piece remains the physical challenge of labeling some things. And I just picked up a industrial label maker. It's kind of a brother-like appliance. I think it's a clone on theirs. And I wanted something very durable because anything that I put outside or on round cables tends to come off. So this looked like the thing that people want when they're looking for a durable label maker. It does heat shrink, or it can print heat shrink labels. So I learned how to use it. A little bit finicky, but much to my dismay, the first test ones I did, I'm always forgetting which is my UPS and non-UPS power supply. They were gone, delaminated. And then I checked my labels outside on the toolboxes, and they're gone too. And this was another product that said that it was outdoor proof labels and all the rest of it. So here's where my head's at, Herman and Corin. I picked up, this will be now my second label printer, 3 if you count the QR code, the Brother desktop printer. I bought NFC tags, an NFC reader writer, when I thought that, well, if you can't get a QR code onto it, you can get an NFC tag onto it. They make them very small. And they sometimes come off as well, especially the ones with paper on them. And we looked recently into engraving, and we looked at these direct contact thermal printers I've seen. But here's what I'm thinking, Herman and Corin. I don't really have much more patience for labels that delaminate, or they'll come off in the sun, or the rain, or NFC tags that will not stick to a certain surface. And I'm looking for that Swiss Army knife. Here's exactly what I'm putting on the inventory. The system produces 4-number asset IDs. You can put obviously a QR code to the asset URL, but each one has a 4-digit ID. So literally, if all you do is write down in some very durable. Oh, I forgot about ink. I forgot about markers. I've built up an incredible selection of permanent markers. White permanent marker, 0.2 inches, paint markers, you name it. And same story. Some of them either it looks they smudge over time. Someone's a promise the world come off, etc. So to come back to what I was about to say there, it's a 4-digit code that if you just put that on something, no matter how small, that's enough to find its inventory record, from which you can find, and this is the whole purpose of the system, where it should be kept and where it goes back to, and all the details about it you might need, like the warranty. So Herman and Corin, please, I'm looking for one tool that will take me out of label purgatory. I want something that will just be reliable, will work, it won't come off in the sun, and it'll get on different surfaces. As I mentioned, labeling cables might seem extreme, but if you're trying to reconnect an Ethernet switch and all the Ethernet cables look the exact same, you need ideally some way to write down on those cables to server, to desktop. You get the picture. So what do you think, Herman and Corin? If you had to narrow it down to one or maybe max 2 products that are really, really worthy of being called industrial grade, these will get your 4-digit asset IDs if you have a home inventory system onto different surfaces. They'll work outdoors, they won't come off, and you can move on and forget about the enterprise of trying to forget all about these low quality Dymo and other products that say they're going to stick and then they just come off, and all your tape and the label maker was a total waste. What would you narrow it down to? Herman and Corin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on my petty inventory struggles and get your recommendations.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corn, and I am sitting here in our usual spot in Jerusalem with my brother, the man who probably knows more about the chemical composition of industrial adhesives than anyone else on this side of the Mediterranean.
Herman Poppleberry, here, at your service. And Corn, you say that like it is a bad thing. Knowing your adhesives is the difference between a well-organized life and a pile of mystery cables in a cardboard box that eventually becomes a fire hazard. It is about the fundamental order of the universe, one polymer chain at a time.
It is a fair point, and honestly, today's prompt from Daniel is right up your alley. Daniel is looking for some truly industrial-grade labeling recommendations. He has been diving deep into his home inventory system using an open-source tool called Homebox, and he is hitting a wall. He has tried the consumer stuff, the QR codes, the NFC tags, even the high-end permanent markers, but things keep falling off or fading, especially outdoors or on tricky surfaces like cables.
I felt that in my soul when I heard the prompt. Labeling purgatory is a real place, and it is paved with peeling thermal paper and faded ink. It is frustrating because you put in all this work to catalog your gear. You set up the database, you assign the asset IDs, and then 6 months later, you are looking at a sticky residue where a label used to be. It is a failure of the physical layer, and in any system, the physical layer is where the truth resides.
Exactly. He specifically mentioned needing something for his computer builds, his workbench, and outdoor toolboxes. He is using 4-digit asset IDs, which is a great system for a home inventory, but if the physical link to the digital record fails, the whole system collapses. So, Herman, let us get into the weeds here. Why does the standard consumer stuff fail so miserably when things get even slightly difficult?
It usually comes down to three things: the adhesive chemistry, the face material, and the printing method. Most consumer labels, like the ones you get from a basic $20 label maker, use a simple acrylic adhesive that is designed for flat, clean, indoor surfaces. Think of a plastic bin in a climate-controlled closet. But the moment you introduce a curved surface, like a cable, you are dealing with something called flaggering. The label has enough internal stiffness that it wants to return to being flat, so it pulls away from the curve. It is essentially fighting itself.
Right, I have seen that. It starts at the edges and then just slowly uncurls until it is just a little flag of plastic on the floor. It looks like the label is trying to escape the wire.
Precisely. And then you have the issue of surface energy. This is a concept people often miss. Certain plastics like polyethylene or polypropylene, which are common in toolboxes and cable jackets, have low surface energy. They are naturally non-stick. A standard adhesive just sits on top of them like water on a waxed car. It never truly wets out or bonds. Then you add environmental factors. UV light from the sun breaks down the polymer chains in the adhesive and the face material. Moisture can get under the edges and emulsify the glue. And if it is a direct thermal label, meaning there is no ink, and the paper itself turns black when heated, any heat or light will eventually turn the whole thing gray or black or just fade it into oblivion.
So if Daniel wants to move out of the amateur leagues and into the industrial grade stuff, where do we start? You have mentioned a few brands over the years that you swear by. We are talking about the stuff that stays put in a factory or a data center.
If we are narrowing it down to the absolute best, the gold standard for industrial labeling is Brady. If you go into a data center, a Boeing factory, or a nuclear power plant, you are going to see Brady labels. For a home user who wants that level of reliability, I would point them toward the Brady M210 or the newer M211. The M211 is particularly interesting because it is a screenless device that you control entirely from your phone via Bluetooth. It is very slick for modern workflows.
I have seen those. They look like they could survive a fall from a truck. They have that rugged yellow handheld design. What makes the actual labels different, though? Because the machine is just the delivery vehicle. Is it just better glue?
It is much more than that. It is material science. Brady does not just sell one type of tape, they have specific materials for specific problems. For Daniel's cable issue, he needs to look at their B427 self-laminating vinyl. This is a game changer. It has a white printable area and then a long tail of clear, flexible vinyl. You wrap the white part around the cable, and then the clear part wraps around and covers the printed area.
Oh, so the label is essentially protecting itself. It is like a built-in screen protector for the text.
Exactly. It creates a permanent, waterproof, chemical-resistant seal around the cable. It will not flag or peel off because the clear tail is sticking to the vinyl itself, not just the cable. Vinyl-to-vinyl bonding is incredibly strong. And for the outdoor toolboxes he mentioned, they have a B595 indoor and outdoor vinyl. That stuff is rated for 8 to 10 years of direct outdoor exposure. It can handle grease, chemicals, and extreme temperatures. It is a completely different beast than the shiny plastic tape you get at the grocery store. We are talking about an adhesive that is designed to bite into those low surface energy plastics I mentioned earlier.
That sounds like exactly what he needs. But let us talk about the cost for a second. Because I know industrial gear comes with industrial prices. Is this something that makes sense for a home inventory system, or is it overkill? I mean, $20 for a roll of tape feels like a lot when you have 500 items to label.
It is definitely an investment. An M210 might set you back $150, and the cartridges are $25 to $35 each. But here's how I look at it. What is the cost of your time? If Daniel spends hours cataloging his M3 screws, his proprietary cables, and his power tools, and then has to do it all over again in 2 years because the labels failed, he has lost way more than $100 in labor. Plus, there is the mental friction of a system you cannot trust. If you see a label peeling, you stop trusting the inventory. Once you stop trusting the inventory, you stop using the system, and then you are back to square one.
That is a great point. The reliability of the physical marker is the foundation of the whole project. Now, what about the other side of the coin? I know you also have a lot of respect for the Brother industrial line. How does that compare to the Brady stuff? I see the Brother P touch machines everywhere.
Brother is the other heavy hitter here. Specifically, their P-Touch Edge or the industrial handhelds like the PT-E500 or the E550W. The big advantage with Brother is their TZE tape technology. Most people know Brother from their office labels, but their industrial line uses a unique lamination process where the text is actually printed on the underside of a clear layer and then bonded to the colored layer in real time inside the machine.
So the ink is sandwiched in the middle? Like a piece of ham in a very thin plastic sandwich?
Yes, exactly. The thermal transfer ink is protected by a layer of clear polyester. You can literally scrub those labels with a wire brush or soak them in acetone, and the text will not budge because you cannot actually touch the ink. For Daniel's workbench, where he might be dealing with solvents, oils, or cleaning fluids while he is tinkering with computers, that lamination is incredible. It is virtually indestructible under normal conditions.
And I think Brother has some specialized tapes for those tricky surfaces too, right? I remember you talking about extra strength adhesive that can stick to a brick if you ask it nicely.
They do. They have the TZES series, which stands for Strong Adhesive. It has about 50% more tack than the standard tape. It is designed for textured surfaces like powder-coated metal or those plastic bins that have a bit of a grain to them. If you have ever tried to put a regular label on a Pelican case or a rugged toolbox, you know they just pop right off because they are only touching the peaks of the texture. The S-series adhesive is thicker and more viscous, so it flows into the valleys of the texture. They also have a flexible ID tape, the TZEFX series, which is their answer to the cable wrapping problem. It is much thinner and more pliable, so it does not have that internal springiness that causes flaggering.
So if you had to choose between the Brady M210 and the Brother E550 for Daniel's specific needs, which way would you lean? He is using Homebox, he is doing computer builds, and he is doing outdoor stuff.
It is a tough call, but for a home inventory system like Homebox, I might actually lean toward the Brother E550W. The W stands for wireless, and that is the secret weapon. It has a smartphone app and computer software. Since Daniel is already using a digital system, he can export his asset IDs as a spreadsheet or a CSV file and then batch print them from his computer or phone. Trying to type 100 different 4-digit codes into a handheld keypad is a recipe for carpal tunnel and a lot of typos.
That is a massive workflow advantage. Being able to just hit print on a list of 50 items and have them come out in a neat strip is huge. But wait, Daniel also mentioned heat shrink tubing in his prompt. He said he learned how to use it, but was disappointed when his test ones delaminated. How does a heat shrink label delaminate? I thought the whole point was that it shrunk onto the wire and became one with the cable.
That caught my ear too. If a heat shrink label is delaminating, it usually means it was not actually a dedicated heat shrink tube, or it was a very low quality knockoff from a random online marketplace. True industrial heat shrink labels, like the ones Brady or Brother make, are flattened tubes of polyolefin. There is no adhesive to delaminate because the tube itself is the label. You slide it over the wire, hit it with a heat gun, and it shrinks down to form a permanent tight sleeve. It is a physical mechanical bond, not a chemical one.
So maybe he was using a regular label and trying to shrink a clear tube over it? I have seen people do that on YouTube as a budget hack.
That is a common hack, but it often fails because the heat from the gun can melt the adhesive on the underlying label, causing it to slide or bubble. Or the clear tube is not UV stable and turns yellow. If he wants the ultimate cable label, he should get the dedicated heat shrink cartridges for the Brady or the Brother. For the Brother, it is the HSE series. It looks professional, it is literally impossible to remove without a blade, and it will never, ever peel off. It is the gold standard for a reason.
I love the idea of heat shrink for cables, especially for those proprietary ones he mentioned. There is nothing worse than having a box of black power bricks and not knowing which one goes to which device. If you have a permanent, unshakable label on the cord itself, you save so much frustration. But you have to remember to put the tube on before you solder the connector, right?
That is the one downside. It is a pre-termination solution. If the cable already has large connectors on both ends, you cannot slide the tube on. In that case, you go back to the self-laminating vinyl wrap. But for his computer builds, if he is making custom cables, heat shrink is the way to go. It looks like it came from the factory that way.
Let us talk about the surfaces he is having trouble with. He mentioned outdoor toolboxes, We talked about UV resistance, but what about the actual physical texture? Some of those heavy-duty plastic cases are designed to be non-stick. Is there a trick to getting even an industrial label to stay on a difficult surface? I know you have a ritual for this.
This is where we get into the practical takeaways that apply regardless of which machine you buy. Even the best adhesive in the world will fail if the surface prep is bad. My number one tip for Daniel is to use 99% isopropyl alcohol. You have to strip away the mold release agents from the plastic and any finger oils. Most people just wipe it with their hand or a damp rag, but that is not enough. You need a chemical clean to increase the surface energy.
I have seen you do this. You are very meticulous about the alcohol wipe. You wait for it to fully evaporate, too.
It makes a 50% difference in bond strength easily. The second trick is a bit more obscure but very effective. Round your corners. If a label is going to fail, it almost always starts at a sharp corner where it can be snagged or where the adhesive can start to lift. If you use a pair of scissors or a dedicated corner rounder to take just a millimeter off each corner, making it a radius instead of a point, the label becomes much more resistant to peeling. It has no starting point for the failure.
That is such a simple, low-tech fix. It makes sense, though. A rounded edge has nothing for a sleeve or a tool to catch on. It is the same reason why airplanes have rounded windows. Stress concentrations.
Exactly. And the third thing is what I call the dwell time. Adhesives are actually very slow-moving liquids. When you first press a label down, it is only touching the high points of the surface. Over the next 24 to 72 hours, the adhesive flows into the microscopic valleys of the surface. This is called wetting out. If you put a label on a toolbox and then immediately throw it into the back of a truck and head out into the rain, it will fail. You need to let it sit in a dry room temperature environment for at least a day to reach its full strength.
I did not know that. I always assumed that once you pressed it on, that was as good as it was going to get. You are saying the glue is actually alive and moving for the first few days.
It is a very slow motion flood. Now, Daniel also mentioned markers. He said he tried high-end permanent markers and they still smudged or faded. I want to defend markers for a second, but only a very specific kind. Because sometimes you just need to write a quick ID on a small part where a label won't fit.
Oh, here we go. The Poppleberry defense of the humble marker. I knew this was coming.
Not just any marker. Most people think of a Sharpie as permanent. In the industrial world, a Sharpie is a temporary suggestion. The ink is dye-based and UV light eats dye for breakfast. If Daniel wants a marker that actually lasts, he needs a solidified paint marker or a high-end laboratory marker. Brands like Sakura or Edding make markers that use actual pigment paint instead of dye-based ink. Pigments are solid particles that sit on the surface and are much more resistant to light and chemicals.
I have used those Sakura solid markers before. They are like a cross between a crayon and a spray paint can. You can write on wet metal with those.
Yes, they are incredible for rough surfaces like wood, concrete, or rusted metal, but for his small asset IDs, I would point him toward the Edding 80040. It is a laboratory marker designed to withstand autoclaves, freezing temperatures, and chemical solvents like xylene. It is used in labs to mark glass slides and plastic tubes that go into liquid nitrogen. If it can survive a lab, it can survive Daniel's workbench. It is a very fine tip, so he can write his 4-digit codes even on tiny components.
That is a great alternative for things that are too small or too oddly shaped for a label. But it sounds like for the bulk of his inventory, the industrial label maker is the way to go. Let us circle back to the Brady versus Brother debate for a moment. You mentioned that the Brother has better software integration. Does Brady have anything similar for the home user? Because Daniel is clearly a tech-savvy guy if he is running Homebox.
They do, but it is a bit more industrial in its user interface. The M211 is actually a screenless device that you control entirely from your phone via the Brady Express Labels app. It is very slick. You can design the label on your phone, pull in data from a CSV file, and print it. The reason I sometimes prefer Brady for purely industrial tasks is their material science. They have labels that are specifically designed for circuit boards that can go through a wave soldering machine at 500 degrees. They have labels for cryogenic storage. If Daniel has a truly weird use case, Brady almost certainly has a material for it. They even have a silver metallic label that looks like a serial number plate from a factory.
It sounds like Brother is the best all-rounder for a high-end home system, but Brady is the specialist if you have a specific, extreme environment. Like if Daniel decides to start storing his computer parts in a vat of liquid nitrogen or a furnace.
That is a perfect summary. For his homebox system, the Brother E550W with some strong adhesive TZE tape and some flexible ID tape would solve 95% of his problems. It gives him that professional, laminated look, it integrates with his digital workflow, and the tapes are widely available. You can find Brother tapes at most office supply stores, whereas Brady usually requires ordering from an industrial supplier like Grainger or Uline.
And for those 4-digit IDs, he can print them quite small. He mentioned that sometimes he just needs to write down the code. If he uses the Brother software, he could even include a tiny QR code next to the 4-digit ID. Even on a 12mm tape, a modern smartphone can read a well-printed QR code. That would make the homebox integration even faster.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings up a great point about the digital physical link. If he is using Homebox, he can generate those QR codes directly. The Brother software allows you to import those images and print them with perfect clarity. If he uses the TZE laminated tape, that QR code will be protected from scratches. I have labels on my outdoor gear that have been through mud, rain, and sun for 3 years, and the QR codes still scan on the first try. It is all about that clear protective layer.
That is the dream, right? A system that just works. No more squinting at a faded marker or finding a blank piece of tape at the bottom of a bin. I think we should also mention the chain print feature on the Brother. Since Daniel is worried about cost, that is a big one.
Good catch, Corn. These industrial machines have a bit of a tape tax, where they leave a 1-inch margin at the beginning of every label. It is a limitation of the cutter mechanism. But if you use the chain print setting, it will print all your labels in one long strip with just a tiny tick mark between them. You save a massive amount of tape that way. If you are printing 50 asset IDs at once, you can save 5 or 6 feet of tape.
That makes the $30 cartridge go a lot further. It is those little workflow tips that make the investment more palatable.
Exactly. And one more thing for Daniel, if he is labeling things that might get hot, like components inside a computer case, he should check the temperature rating of the tape. Most TZE tapes are rated up to 150 degrees Celsius, which is way hotter than any PC should ever get, but it is good to have that peace of mind.
I think we have given Daniel some solid options here. The Brady M210 or M211 for the absolute toughest environments, and the Brother E550W for the best balance of industrial strength and digital integration. Plus the tip about the adding laboratory markers for the ultra-small stuff.
And do not forget the alcohol wipes in the rounded corners. I am telling you, Corn, those 2 things alone would solve half of the delamination problems people have with cheaper labels. It is not just the tool, it is the technique.
It is the attention to detail that separates the Poppleberries from the rest of the world. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to pivot slightly. We have talked about the hardware, but what about the downstream implications of this? If Daniel labels everything in his home with industrial grade, permanent markers, does that affect the resale value? If I am buying a used GPU from him in 3 years and it has a Brady heat shrink sleeve on the power cable, am I happy about that?
If I were the buyer, I would be thrilled. It tells me that the previous owner was meticulous. It suggests that if they took the time to professionally label their cables and log them in an inventory system, they probably took good care of the hardware too. It is like buying a car from someone who has a neatly organized folder of every oil change and part replacement. The label is a signal of quality. It shows that the item was treated as an asset, not just a piece of junk.
That is a great perspective. It turns the inventory system from a personal chore into a value add for the items themselves. It is professionalizing the home office. It makes the whole environment feel more like a laboratory and less like a cluttered spare room.
Exactly. We live in a world of increasing complexity. The number of cables, adapters, and small components we all own is exploding. A system like Daniel's, backed by industrial-grade physical markers, is the only way to stay sane. It is moving from a state of chaos to a state of managed assets, and there is a certain zen-like calm that comes from knowing exactly where every M3 screw is and knowing that the label will still be there in 2035.
Well, I think we have covered the world of industrial labeling pretty thoroughly. Daniel, I hope that helps you escape labeling purgatory. It sounds like you're on the right track with Homebox. You just needed the right physical tools to bridge the gap between the digital database and the physical object.
And if you do get that Brother E550, send us a photo of those heat shrink cables. There is nothing more satisfying than a perfectly shrunk, perfectly printed cable label. It is pure organizational eye candy. I might even put it on my desktop background.
Truly. Well, that is it for our deep dive into the sticky world of adhesives and industrial printers. If you're enjoying my weird prompts, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really does help the show reach more people who might be struggling with their own mystery cable boxes.
It really does. And if you have your own weird prompt or a hyper-specific technical question you want us to dig into, you can always reach us at show@myweirdprompts.com. We love hearing about the systems you guys are building. No topic is too niche for us.
You can also find all of our past episodes and a contact form at myweirdprompts.com. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for joining us in the workshop today. This has been My Weird Prompts.
We will see you next time. Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.